That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, a new documentary directed by Kristina Lindström and Petri, which premiered January 29th, 2021 at the Sundance Film Festival, which is, of course, virtual this year. Therefore, it's the first time Joseph's kind of attended with me, and is one of a select handful of titles that I convinced him to watch.
There are two directors?
Yes.
Kristian and...
Kristina Lindström and Petri.
Kristian and Kristina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They're Swedish.
Great. Okay, this documentary is about a man named Björn Andresen.
Correct.
Okay, the reason Björn is notable is because a very famous director named
Lucino
Visconti made a film called Death in Venice,
which is based on the Thomas Mann novella.
And the film was released in 1971. So the film is about a older gentleman who's a composer, and he's at some like beautiful hotel or whatever when he becomes infatuated by a young teenage boy.
Mm-hmm.
Tadzio. That young boy was played by Björn, the subject of this documentary. So the movie was a hit at Cannes, and the boy, or Björn, playing Tadzio was labeled the most beautiful boy in the world.
By Visconti.
And he became like an overnight, like, teenage heartthrob.
Sure, yeah.
So his flame burned for a very short period.
Yes.
Like a couple of years, this kid was popular. We kind of get the sense that part of the reason was he was under contract with Visconti,
mm-hmm.
so he couldn't do anything else except
mm-hmm.
make appearances, and he did some commercials, recorded some old bullshit music in Japan, whatever.
He was a teen idol in Japan.
Okay.
Shortly after, for a little bit, yeah.
But we find him in modern time,
mm-hmm.
living in... Is he back in Sweden?
Yes.
Okay. And he's just an old man. The only thing the one thing he's notable for, probably after Death in Venice, is he plays the old man who jumps off the cliff in Midsommar.
Mm-hmm. Ari Aster's 2019 film.
So what is that? Like 60? Well, how many years is that from? Like 40 plus years between Death in Venice and Midsommar. We skip all of them 40 years, and we just see him now.
He was in other films that weren't, quite as notable as...
The documentary doesn't tell us any of that, though.
Correct. We do visit a period in 86, 87 when a child of his died of SIDS. That is touched upon.
I was very annoyed by this documentary because...
I was too.
Okay. Where to begin?
Well, you've never seen Death in Venice.
No.
Which...
I'm sure it's better than this documentary.
Oh yeah, it's Visconti. And there was at the Berlin Film Festival, I want to say in 2018, they had a beautiful retrospective of a bunch of Visconti titles. God, I don't think you've seen any Visconti films. But
I don't even know that talking about this. I mean, you can, and I'm not interrupting you, but I just feel like it almost sullies this director's work, this documentary, because it really has nothing to do, except the idea that this person became famous off of this one movie. But the documentary doesn't really examine...
It starts off in a juicy kind of way to me because, it actually starts off with a snippet from 1962 and skips ahead to the making of Death in Venice. But that 60s period was where we learn of Björn's mother was found dead in the woods, and he was raised by his grandmother, who's the one that kind of pushed him into stardom per se. So all of those are like interesting tidbits, and we get these. I'd say initially I thought were kind of cool visuals of Björn with this flowing white hair, who's revisiting certain areas, like he's like a ghost in his own story. But then it just swiftly declines because there are all kinds of questions to be asked that nobody's really asking, and I don't know that I got a very clear portrait of Björn watching this film, because Visconti, they show snippets of the press conference at Cannes, and Visconti's already talking about him. He's already too old. He's already surpassed his beauty. He's already like a flame that's...
He's like 16.
On the wane. Yeah, it's kind of disturbing to see. And we get hints, and I think nobody really wants to go there, that being part of this kind of a very infamous queer film markedly affected this heterosexual man, because he was a gay love interest, per se. Maybe not in Japan, where a bunch of teen girls seem to have liked him, but and how that affected him. He talks about going to a nightclub after the film premiered, and how everybody looked at him voraciously, like they were going to give him a blowjob. But we immediately dropped that then, and that's profound.
Right, but I think, so basically the documentary just kind of starts with him today, like modern time, and he is being, there's the threat of him being evicted from the apartment he's lived in forever, because he's basically like a filthy hoarder. And he's dating a woman who's significantly younger. Jessica, who's something else, but she appears to be like in her late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
She assists him in cleaning up his apartment. Then we see him getting dressed up, looking like a proper adult, to meet the landlord to explain, like, I've cleaned up, I'm not going to be irresponsible again, can I stay in my apartment? And then we just see him like loafing about. Like you said, it starts with some very juicy stuff. Like his mother's body being found in the woods, and thinking that maybe there's some mystery behind that. Then the elephant in the room is this heterosexual man who starred in a very popular film as a teenager with gay themes, and kind of was lusted after by gay men. And that idea is introduced because he does share that for a couple of years or summers after the film came out, he spent a lot of time traveling the world, and he had a lot of like older gay men as like benefactors,
particularly in Paris.
So obviously, not that I want to hear about anyone's sexual abuse, or I'm not like, that's not what's of interest, but it's like it's important because Bjorn seems very sad and disconnected. And even Jessica, his girlfriend, there's a scene there's a moment when she calls him on the phone to say, like, you're a terrible boyfriend, and rails into him. So he's clear. And then we have his sister,
Annike,
who's only like 11 months age difference.
Yeah, that's interesting
She talks about how like he has moments where he just falls off because of his essentially mental health. So it's like, well, where does this stem from? Is this like trauma from the abuse you experienced at some point? The documentary is giving us nothing. Then what annoyed me is we get moments like where Bjorn goes to like a library or like some sort of public records place and gets the death certificate, like reviews the death certificate of his mom.
And the details, I believe, of what state her body was found in.
But I don't know that was, but they make it seem like he uncovered something, but this was not a secret. He just the documentarian is not making it clear that like he didn't already know this, or that he just chose not to want to know. But it's not like this big reveal. It's just that we're seeing him reacting to reading how his mom died. Then there's a moment where we see him and his sister listening back like to a tape recording of their mom. And again, we don't know that that's not the first time he's heard it. We're just witnessing him listening to it. And he gets somewhat emotional.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like there are bits and pieces there, but it doesn't really come together as a cohesive portrait about Bjorn.
There's a type of anime called
the manga,
which I'm not familiar with, but there's an artist, a manga artist, who says
Riyoko Ikeda,
a lovely lady with a beautiful necklace on. She, I guess, is like a well-known manga artist, and one of her characters was inspired by Bjorn's character in Death in Venice. So she tells this sort of story of how she was inspired by it. We see her drawing, and she finally gets to meet him. And when I tell you that was the most bullshit-ass meeting...
Well, what was so terrible about it is she's saying some very profound things about how she wondered... She began to wonder all these years about how using this image of him has affected him, and maybe her projections on him were incorrect. And he's just sitting there...
We don't even see him in the frame most of the sequence. It's just kind of like at one point we see like the corner of his profile, and he's not reacting to her. It's like... This poor lady put on her good sweater and put on her little makeup to come do this interview, and I was also curious, like, yeah, how did you feel about like, how do you feel about being an anime character and we get nothing?
I think what's so transfixing that is missed out on is the juxtaposition of the text of Death in Venice, and this Tadzio is, representative of this angel of death, because the film stars Dirk Bogarde and Silvana Mangano, and Bogarde is this aging homosexual who stays in this area where everybody's dying of the plague, and he's staying just so he can have to be in the presence of this young beauty. And there's all these profound themes in Death in Venice about intellectual death, and to put your eyes on beauty, you put your eyes on death. Like, there are all kinds of things about that, and how this making of this film kind of caused this arrested development where he became this object of beauty always to be acted upon, but ostensibly because of that, never kind of grew up.
Watching Bjorn move about is like watching a bored teenager.
Yeah, he likes music and he does compositions, but it's...
We see, like, there are some shots of him sitting at a bar drinking. He is always, I mean, from the Death in Venice up until we see him now, he's extremely thin. Mm-hmm. It looks like he just has a liquid diet and smokes a lot of cigarettes. But, like, no personality, flat affect. And it's like, I feel like there's nothing interesting about watching this man. We needed some explanation. And I guess Bjorn talks about his experience shooting Death in Venice, and he says that Visconti only said 4 things to him: go, stop, turn around, and smile. And I feel like this documentary is just him go, stop, turn around. He's not even smiling.
Because again, like in that film, he's just a figure. He's representative of something, this idea that of being acted upon. And he hated being called, as he says, the most beautiful boy in the world, and how that kind of put him in this box. And then, interestingly, that's what the documentary is called. So the claim to fame, the weight that is weighing him down is still the entry point into his story, the only interesting entry point.
I generally think I have no interest in ever interviewing anyone about film, but I kind of would want to interview the people who made this, because I feel like, they got, however they have access to Bjorn, they got it, and he agreed, and I'm sure they had a lot of ideas of where they wanted to go, and this person was resistant perhaps, or something, because I just don't see why they would just roll camera on someone who's like, has the personality of a rubber chicken. Like, I
think that Ari Aster's film, and once people kind of realized that this man was Tadzio, I think that renewed an interest in him and as this kind of spectral figure.
You're talking about Midsommar?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Oh, you said Ari Aster's film.
It was Midsommar.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't have known that. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. And I think that they thought they stumbled, as a lot of documentarians, I believe, do, is you think that you found this nugget, and the more they dug, they couldn't scratch beyond the surface, I think.
And I also appreciate, like, okay, so they probably got funding to do this thing or whatever, and like, once you start, you need to finish, and once you finish, you put it out there. So this is an example of just something that got made, but really, we don't need this. We don't.
It feels... No, I wouldn't say that it's not needed. I think that it definitely has an interest in a draw. Specifically, is Death in Venice, beyond cinephiles, is that something that people are really talking about anymore? To me, Criterion just put out Death in Venice recently. This feels like a documentary that should have been an extra feature on that disc.
Right, but no one's checking for Björn Andresen. And this documentary is not about Death in Venice. It's about this man, and it's like, okay, so who's checking for him? No one. Maybe some old bitches in Sweden and Japan, I don't know. And it's like, that's not to say that a person who doesn't have, like, isn't part of the popular zeitgeist at the moment can't be a popular subject matter.
Sure, of course.
But he's not interesting, and they weren't able to get anything out of him, so we're just watching this, like, it's like watching paint dry. And then Jessica, his girlfriend, who seems like she wants to be on a reality TV show,
yes,
because she is really playing it up,
yes,
particularly on the recorded phone call when she confronts him. And then not even like 10 minutes later, we have a sequence where she and Bjorn are like walking in the city streets, and like they're in love and twirling.
And you're confused about the tone, what story we're trying to tell about Bjorn, because we initially meet her chastising him for leaving the gas on, and that's why he's facing eviction. And what exactly is the relationship? She's exploitative.
What does she say on her phone call with him? Like,
she calls him an old geezer.
She calls him an old geezer, but also she says, like, because Bjorn finds out that she went to go Jessica tells Bjorn, like, oh, I went to go hang out with this man, Peter, or, and then...
They play a little game. Peter who?
Peter who was like, you knew. Yeah, and then she goes, Peter whatever, and like...
Jessica's a handful, I can
Anyway, I thought that this documentary should have been called Beating Around the Bush, because obviously... When I watched the trailer, I'm thinking, oh, we're going to get some like dark behind the scenes sort of things about the filming of this. And this is why he's sort of been stunted emotionally. Because clearly this man is not like a well-adjusted adult human person.
I feel like there are so many, right, and there are so many directions that I think the filmmakers could have teased out a little better, such as other men like this that Visconti did cast. I think that Bjorn looks a lot like Helmut Berger from The Damned, and kind of Berger's trajectory and the loss of his looks and drug use, and like there are interesting themes about exploitation there. And even I was also reminded of The Runaways. Remember with Joan Jett and Sherry Curry, and because they blew up in Japan, much like this young man did, and were more popular there. And like, look what happened to Sherry Curry, for instance. There are things about that kind of fame, being that young, and drugs and sex and alcohol that are completely absent from this as well.
I don't know what else to say. I would not recommend this. I was very frustrated when the 90 minutes was up, or however long it was. And my last note was like, this film is proof that people who have extraordinary things happen to them aren't necessarily interesting people.
Sure.
Like, and the storyteller, the filmmaker, it's their job to like spin this into something that people want to see, and they failed.
Just like, and lots of people have pretty voices but have nothing to say.
Are you talking about me?
No.
Oh. Do you have anything else to say?
No. What would you give this film?
Like 1.5 out of 5?
I think it's lower than I think some of the things it suggests, but I think 1.5 is fair. I think that if you have an interest in Bjorn or Death in Venice, of course give it a look, but it feels very like this is for a very obscure audience based on what it presents.
Since you mentioned it, I think what would be interesting is to take some of those, like the other young men who were cast, like who kind of faded into obscurity, and make a documentary about a number of those men, and hearing them talk about what their life was like after being, the hot little ticket for a while. But yeah, this ain't it, honey. Okay, bye.
Bye.